Welcome to Bottle Rocket with Elena Sucheva, your top hockey podcast. Welcome back to Bottle Rocket. I'm Elena, joined as always by Maven Teabag. And today our guest is Glenn Dreyfuss, a longtime hockey writer who's had a front row seat to NHL history. Glenn was there for the birth of the two NHL expansion teams, the Washington Capitals in the 1970s and later the Seattle Kraken. He's also the author of the Legends of Landover, long lost stories of the Washington Capitals. Glenn, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Teabag, for having a copy of the book. You are my favorite fighting saint, although I don't actually think you're a saint. Stan, I know he's not a saint.
Is that the Minnesota Fighting Saints?
Yeah.
Well, I covered them, believe it or not. Not the team, but I did games for the New England Whalers when we were doing WHA. This is back in 74, 75. And they were playing in a crazy new building in St. Paul that had plastic boards, see-through boards. But I remember two things about the being there, or maybe more. They were a very, very tough team. And we, the Whalers had Nicky Fotiu and a couple of pretty tough guys, but the Fighting Saints, they were really true to the name, and they kicked the crap out of us. They knocked us off. And the other thing that I remember about it is that I stayed at they had a couple of doctor conventions, so we were stuck in what was the worst hotel I've ever stayed in my life, second worst. In Czechoslovakia, I stayed in a hotel in Košice. It had the biggest roach I ever saw in my life, other than Guy Roach. Guy Roach was a great defenseman, by the way. He was the really biggest roach I ever saw in my life. But this hotel was so old that it had old telephones. It was like from a 1930 movies with William Powell and Myrna Loy. Anyhow, so I when I see that, I have very, very nostalgic thoughts about and Glenn Sonmore, who was a great buddy of mine and who played for the Rangers. He was very, very much there. Glenn Sonmore, by the way, would have had a terrific career. He would have been like I think Marchand, but he lost an eye, when he was playing for the Rangers in an accident, and so he went into coaching. He also did a book, by the way. Yeah, did you know that?
No, I haven't seen it.
It's pretty old. It's called Old Time Hockey, and he tells about the greatest single fight in history. But I don't want to digress. I just saw that. I got excited. Let's talk about. Can I ask you the first question, Glenn?
Yeah, well, I thought we would say goodbye. We're out of time. Thanks.
Yeah.
It was good seeing everybody. Good night.
I told you 1,000 times, don't be funnier than me. You can get a gross misconduct for that. If you don't get a gross misconduct, you'll get Lillian Gross, who I had a blind date with.
No, please go ahead.
Okay. It's a great book. I've said that to you many, many times. What's your favorite story?
Well, my favorite story, I'm going to tell you one favorite story about the same player. And then if you like that story enough, I'll tell you another story about the same player. So Todd Bidner, who probably hasn't been mentioned on a hockey podcast before, he played 12 games for the Capitals in the 1980s. So these days, you have to have an ambulance on site or the hockey game can't start. Well, Bidner was playing against the Minnesota North Stars, to continue the Minnesota theme, at Capitol Center, and he broke his leg. And what did they do for Todd Bidner? They loaded him in a taxi.
Hey,
Okay. He didn't even have his Capitol sweater off. Okay. They load him in a taxi to take him to the hospital. He gets fixed up at the hospital. He gets a ride back to the rink. Nobody's there because after the game, the Capitals fire their coach, Gary Green. They fire their general manager, Max McNabb. All this happens while he's at the hospital. And one more thing about this Todd Bidner story, the Capitals keep encouraging him to go to rehab and get better. Do they care about Todd Bidner? Not all that much. While he's injured, he's earning a major league salary. They want him to get better so they can send him back down to the minors so he can get a minor league salary because he's on a two-way contract. That's the second best Todd Bidner story. So if you want, later on, I'll tell you the best Todd Bidner story.
we will want it. We will want it. If you want to know my favorite, it's the garbage can. The garbage can is the Stanley Cup. You got to tell that one.
Okay, so in the Capitals' first season, they had lost their first 37 road games. There were only 40 road games, so they were about to go the whole season without winning one. Well, fortunately, the late lamented California Golden Seals were almost as bad as they were. So the Capitals go in to Oakland along with almost 4,000 fans, not quite. And they win 5-3. Their general manager, Milt Schmidt, said it was like winning the Stanley Cup. Well, not exactly. There was one of those old metal corrugated trash cans. So either Tommy Williams or Ace Bailey, it depends who's recalling the story, grabs the trash can. They get like a Sharpie marker. They get all the players to sign the trash can, and then they carry the trash can back on the ice and they skate around handing the trash can to each other as if it was the Stanley Cup, and it became known in lore as the Stanley Can.
How long did it take to write this book, Glenn? Like it's an incredible amount of research you did. You know?
Well, first of all, Jerry, I want to say that you are a hockey somebody.
Yeah.
And you're not a hockey nobody, despite what your book says. You are always going to be a hockey somebody to me. And between you and me and the Maven, Jerry, we've written 150 hockey books. You know, one for me, one for you, maybe two. And then, you know, Maven's done the heavy lifting. But to answer your question, I didn't work on it.
We're the Gretzky brothers of writing.
We're the That's right. Together we scored 800 goals.
Yeah.
But I worked on it on and off for 10 years.
Wow. Holy cow.
Well, the brilliant thing about the book is that you have so many different stories, and practically every story you have an attribution, which I think is wonderful. You know, you got to writers all over the place. You know, some of these guys I knew pretty well, but the amount of personalities involved and the amount of stories and great stories it makes it one of the best books I've ever read. And I have to tell you that the one story you didn't run, but I may have told you about, is how my son Simon insulted the then head of the team, Dick Patrick. Do you know that story?
No.
Okay, well, I was connected to the Patricks in many ways. When I worked for the Rangers in 54, 55, Buzz Patrick was the coach, later became the GM. And his son was Dick Patrick, who played some pretty good collegiate hockey and became a very important man with the Capitals. And it so happened that I was invited by the Washington CBS TV station, I forget what the call that is were, but it doesn't matter, to come there to discuss what was then a very, very significant hockey topic. So significant that they were willing to, pay my way back and forth to Washington. And they let me bring my young son, Simon, who was then about 10, 11, and he's really into hockey pretty big. So Dick was involved because he was the other person on the show with me and the moderator. And as you know, I'm sure Dick's a great guy. He's still connected with the team. Wonderful guy. So after the show was over, he was very palsy with me and Simon. And he said, is there a place you'd like to go to? Well, we were planning to go to the Smithsonian before we went back to New York. So I said, how about I take you over there? So we said, great. So we piled into his Cadillac and we schmoozing and things. And he says to Simon, because, we were talking all kinds of hockey. He says to Simon, so what do you think of my team? And Simon says, what you need is a goaltender. And I nearly clutched. I thought I wanted to jump out of the car. But Dick being a great guy, he took it in stride and said, you're right.
Your son is an astute hockey observer. Well, wait a second. Wasn't he a goaltender?
I think he was. I think he
was. So maybe he was hoping for an audition.
Oh, you mean Simon?
Yeah.
Simon was he was, but he was only about 11. And that's not what he was wanted. What he did was he wanted to give this guy a candid answer, and he did. And Dick, took it well. I didn't take it too well until I was sure that Dick wasn't going to jam on the brakes and tell us to go take a taxi.
Well, I'll just tell you the first great thing Dick Patrick did for the Capitals. To this day, he's the team president, but the Capitals almost went out of business. They had to hold a telethon, a Save the Caps telethon, because the team was threatening to move or disband. And Dick Patrick came in along with some other investors with a wad of cash. And that's one of the reasons there still is a Washington Capitals.
Wow. I went over the 1974 expansion draft with the Caps in Kansas City. The first two rounds, they picked their goalies, Ron Lowe and Belheimer, and Kansas City took Michel Plasse and some other guy I don't remember. But I think goaltending was the least of their problems. I mean, I think the barrage that those goalies faced, I thought they handled themselves fairly well.
Tommy McVie, the Capitals coach starting midway through their second season, and probably the second funniest man in hockey after the Maven, once said, we should take our goalies from game to game in an ambulance. I mean, some of the shot totals that the Capitals faced were ridiculous. Ron Lowe tells a story about playing a game in Buffalo. They had a temperature gauge up. It was a game in, I guess, late March, and and the temperature gauge said 54 degrees, and Ivan LeBray skates up to Ron Lowe and says, Ronnie, if we give the Sabres a couple more shots, they're going to have more shots than the temperature. And it was 54 degrees. I mean, Lowe would sit in his stall and be in tears. And Michel Bellemare, who set an NHL record, he played an entire season and never won a game for the Capitals in 74 to 75. He would sit at his stall and you'd hear him mumbling 42, 45, 49. The shot totals of shots he had to face in games. Bellemare once had to face 2 penalty shots in the same game against the Blackhawks, and he saved them both. I mean, behind a decent defense, they were fine NHL goalies. You're right, Jerry, and good for sticking up for your brethren.
Yeah. Well, also I noticed in that expansion draft for both teams, the majority of, I would say like 95% of the players that were picked played for those teams. Yeah, so in today's NHL, if half of the expansion players played, I'd be surprised. But I thought that was incredible. Like they just played the guys that they picked in the expansion draft. There's very few that came from somewhere else.
Well, you mentioned Tommy McPhee. I don't know whether you're aware, but a guy out in West Coast in Portland, Oregon, is doing a book about that.
No,
And,
I know that's where Tommy lived and that's where he was from and he played there.
I'm putting him in touch with you. I spoke
Okay.
and Tommy had more lines in there's a collection of great hockey humor, and there's so many great lines from Tommy. We had him in Jersey. I've often said, in fact, I told this guy, I said, Tommy McPhee is funnier and a better personality than Don Cherry. But the difference is that Tommy McPhee never had an agent, and to get him the exposure, he had that. You remember that great line he had about being a coach?
Yeah, he said, I'd rather find out my wife was cheating on me than keep losing. At least I could ask her to stop. So
yeah, the one story that I really enjoyed was I don't know where they were, but they were chanting "We love you, Coach" to Tommy McPhee, and the owner was standing next to him. And the owner says, "I love you too, Coach." And Tommy McPhee says, "Will you still love me if we miss the playoffs next year?" And the owner says, "Yes, and I'll miss you too."
Abe Poland, who was the owner,
Abe
had
Poland,
once
yes.
told McVie that he was going to sign him to a 20-year contract because he had improved the team so much. He fired McVie a year later, and Tommy said, "Wait, I still got 19 years left." So, he was a character, and he had a gravel voice like he had swallowed asphalt. But what a character, and really what a great guy. He was so into his game and cared so passionately that his son, one of his sons, was a stick boy for the Capitals, and after a loss, Tommy drove home and forgot to take his son. He left his son at the rink. He had to drive back. and get him. Sometimes he was more invested than some of his players.
Let me ask you this. You're now with another expansion team, the Kraken. And tell us what you're doing with the Kraken. And I'll give you $50 if you have them change their cockamamie name.
Those are a team at Kraken.
55. Well, tell us about it. What you're doing.
The one thing they said is that the fans of the team couldn't call themselves crackheads. So, it's funny how expansion has changed, Stan, because the Kraken won 27 games. I cover them for an online site. I cover them and the new women's hockey team, the Torrent. And the Kraken won 27 games in their first season, and everybody was holding their heads and wailing, "We only won 27 games. We're awful." And I'm thinking that's more than triple the number of games the Capitals lost in their first season. The Capitals took 9 years to make the playoffs. The Kraken made the playoffs in their second season. They have regressed recently. After their last game, and you'll probably appreciate this, Stan, Lane Lambert, who used to coach the Islanders, came out afterward in his press conference and said, "That was the worst game we've played all season. I don't understand." And maybe you're hoping for that kind of sincere reaction from Mike Sullivan and the Rangers.
Mike Sullivan has done a terrible job. Mike Sullivan went 3 straight years in Pittsburgh, his last 3 years, without making the playoffs with Sidney Crosby, Malkin, Gino, and
Letang.
Straight years, and then they dump him, and he comes to New York, and the Rangers are worse than they were last year, which was bad. They're not going to make the playoffs. And guess what? This guy, Dan Hughes, is now with Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's going to make the playoffs. Sidney's having a phenomenal year. Malkin is so happy he wants to come back next year. So, but you see, we're not talking Rangers here because it's such a sad, it's a Humpty Dumpty organization from the owner to the GM to the coach. And what makes it so humiliating is this is the 100th anniversary of the hockey team. And it's just, it's unbelievable. But what I want to know about the Kraken is that you open, you put the franchise there. How do you know it's going to succeed, and why has it succeeded so well, so fast?
First of all, I want to apologize to Jerry and Elena for mentioning the Rangers to the Maven and raising his blood pressure. I apologize. But, Seattle has more than 100 years of hockey history. The first team to win the Stanley Cup from the United States, before there was a National Hockey League, was the Seattle Metropolitans. They had many, many years of successful Western Hockey League teams. And then when the WHL became a junior league, there's actually 2 junior teams up here in the Seattle suburbs. So there was a hockey history, even though I will grant you it is a truly non-traditional hockey market. But what really made Seattle's bid possible is this image you see behind me, Climate Pledge Arena. Neither the NHL nor the NBA was coming to Seattle with the arena that they had. So they put in the money. This is the key. They put in the money, Oakview Group, without asking for money from the city or state, to do a complete renovation of the arena. And because there was no basketball team, the Sonics, who were the beloved NBA team, had left. This region was hungry for pro sports in the wintertime, and the Kraken filled that need, and they sell out every game. And when they had their one playoff season in 22-23, the town really got behind them because it's an easy team to like. They're just going through the expansion pangs kind of in a reverse order.
You know what? They should have a theme song that's meaningful. And the theme song is "You Are So Easy to Love." And that was Cole Porter. But I must correct you. I must correct you. You had the nerve to say it's a non-traditional market. You contradicted yourself. Any team that goes back to the 1917s is traditional. And let me tell you something else, my good friend. I followed the Pacific Coast Hockey League very carefully. I have friends who were involved in the Pacific Coast Hockey League. And the name that I told them that they should have had was a name that was famous with the minor league team, the Seattle Ironmen.
Yes.
That's a great name. And the reason why they were the Ironmen is that the guy who owned the team then had an iron company in Seattle. Now, it's good that he didn't have a salt company, because then they'd be sorry, I got carried away.
Well, even better that he didn't, own Preparation H or something like that. I'm sorry. I was being funny again. I apologize.
My wife Shirley's family is from Washington State, and her parents, when we got married in '68, and we went out there for the summer. They were on Hood Canal in a town called Shelton. And at that time, a guy who was running the league, who I happen to know, his name was Gene Konasowicz. He was a great player in Harvard. And we went out to dinner, me, Shirley, and Gene. And they were hoping that this was just at the beginning of NHL expansion. They wanted to do what basically the WHA wound up doing. They wanted to take some of the best cities in the Pacific Coast League. Seattle was a great town. Portland was a great town. And Gene told us that, they were meeting with the NHL people, but the NHL people wanted to box them out, because what the NHL people wanted to bring their own teams in with the money they were going to get. So it took a while, but Seattle, they even had a Seattle City League. That's how traditional they were. So if you don't mind my saying, don't give me this non-traditional. You want non-traditional, Tampa Bay.
Right, you are. And Elena and Jerry, if you haven't done a show on Shirley Fischler, that is a worthy topic. She was a female sports writing trailblazer, to the point where they wouldn't even let her in the Madison Square Garden press box. And how good a writer was Shirley Fischler? So good that Stan said she was a better writer than he was. She worked with him on the Whalers telecast. I mean, she is an incredible story. Stan, I hope someday you write a book about her.
I'll tell you one great Shirley story, which is connected to Simon's story when we were with Dick Patrick. Johnny Ferguson was a buddy of mine via a hockey player with the Rangers, Aldo Guidolin, and Aldo wound up with the Cleveland Barons. And when they were playing Springfield, I went out to see the game there, had lunch with the team. And while we were sitting at a booth, this guy is walking down the aisle toward us, and Aldo says, "Wait, I gotta introduce you to this guy." And he introduces me to the guy. I give him my hand, And when I thought I put my hand in, it was like a baseball mitt. Well, it was Johnny Ferguson, of course, who went on to Stanley Cup winning fame with the Canadiens. And Johnny Ferguson, at that time, when he was with the Canadiens, he would beat the crap out of the Rangers every single time. And at that time, we had Rangers season tickets, and Shirley, of course, at that time was rooting for the Rangers. So it turns out that we were asked to do a book called Up from the Minor Leagues of Hockey. The guys talking about how minor league games helped them into the NHL, and one of the guys was Fergie. And I agreed to meet Fergie at the Warwick Hotel in Philly when they were played the Flyers. And Shirley came along. And when we sat down, of course, I had been pals with Fergie. I introduced him to my wife, and this is Shirley, and Shirley is Johnny Ferguson. Before anything happened, on the short hop, she said, "Mr. Ferguson, I have to tell you one thing. I hate you." And then, of course, she had to explain because he was beating the crap out of her Rangers. But that was a great opening. She didn't fool around. She did something like that with Lou Lamoriello when I wanted to crawl under the table.
Glenn, do you think expansion teams today have it too easy compared to the past?
Yeah, I love that question because I think what the owners have finally realized of the existing clubs is it's in their best interest to have competitive expansion teams. Maybe not as competitive as the Golden Knights, but competitive, because back in the 70s when the Capitals were expansionists and the Kansas City Scouts, and before that the Islanders and the Flames and the Canucks and the Sabres, the existing owners were so miserly with talent that people forget, before the Capitals, the Islanders lost 60 games their first season. And what people don't remember is that many of these expansion teams, going all the way back to the Seals, didn't ever pay their full expansion fee. The Capitals, for instance, they had a $6 million bill to pay to enter the NHL. Eventually, they paid maybe half of that. A lot of other expansion teams did too. In 1970s dollars, the NHL owners lost tens of millions of dollars in 70s money because they had to agree to accept less than the full expansion fee. And why? Because they were only giving teams their dregs out of the players they couldn't wait to get rid of. So I think that whether it's good or not for fans, it makes sense for the finances of the league not to blindfold and hog tie your expansion franchises when they get started.
I got a scoop for you. We're going to have on this show a guy who appeared in one of my books and in one of your books, because Bill Mickelson played for the original Islanders, and then he played for your team, and he's a very, very successful guy now. I think he led the league in plus minuses for 2 years.
I know that's what he's tied to. Yes, a record that will never be broken. But yeah, he went on to be an executive with IBM. He's got a daughter, Megan, who played and I think won a gold medal for the Canadian women's team. And he's got a son who played for the Tampa Bay Lightning. And so Megan, when she would go to school, would come home very sad because her parents would get teased. Her dad would get teased by the other school kids for having a rotten plus minus. And Bill said to them, ask them what their dad's plus minus was, meaning they never even made it to the NHL. So tell them to shut up.
But we're going to have Megan on also. I got news for you, because she's very successful in Calgary doing hockey TV, and Bill's a great guy. He's just a wonderful guy, and I did a piece on him for the one of the Islander magazines, and he said that it's the first year, and he's getting an opportunity. The guys did their best, and of course they were so bad that my friend did a book on them called Hapless, because they were the hapless Islanders. You know the story. Bill Torrey said that he thought our middle name was the New York Hapless Islanders. Every story had, he said, every story had to read about the team. They referred to them as the Hapless Islanders, and that's what they were. They were hapless, like the Rangers now, by the way.
Like a baseball pitcher who has a 20-loss season, he's probably the best pitcher on the team. Mickelson was probably their best defenseman. Otherwise, they wouldn't have put him out to be, minus 84. That wasn't on him. And that's why the record will never be broken.
I got news for you. Do you know the baseball pitcher who you're referring to?
Yes, but I'll let you tell it.
Well, at around the 1939-1940 season, the Philadelphia Phillies had a terrible team, a really awful team, but they were in last place, and they had one very good pitcher, and his name was Hugh Mulcahy. And just like a goalie on one of the expansion teams that we know about, you have Washington team and the Islanders. You get no matter how good he was, they'd lose. And of course, every day there was a game in the box score in the paper. At the bottom would say winning pitcher Joe Smith, losing pitcher Mulcahy, and he got the nickname. His nickname was Losing Pitcher Mulcahy.
So how did the Seattle team come up with the name Kraken, and what was the theory behind I imagine marketing purposes?
Well, it started to get steam by the fan base, and because the question is, do we want to call ourselves Metropolitans? No, that sounds too much like New York. So they went through a process where they were asking fans to help pick the name. Now, the real truth is the owners had decided on Kraken a long time before. Most times when owners open up their to fans to help pick a team name, they've really picked it. But then they can come back and say, okay, we're going to accede to popular demand and call the team the Kraken. I'm not sure how I feel about these names that don't have plurals. That's the trend now. The Mammoth. I think there's 5 teams now in the NHL that have singular names, but it was Kraken. It became beloved. A lot of people didn't know what a Kraken was. A lot of people still don't know what a Kraken is, but that's the team name.
It's a fishtail, right?
That's a squid.
It's a mythical, enormous sea creature who lives in the depths of the ocean and comes up with its giant tentacles and swallows ships and sends them to their final reward.
So we still don't know what it means.
So, witnessing Kraken's birth, how did that experience compare to the Capitals' beginnings?
Well, the Kraken had 32,000 season ticket requests in the first hour after it was announced, before they even had the Kraken name. The Capitals, by contrast, the first home game at their sparkling new 18,000 seat arena, Capitol Center, they played the LA Kings and 8,000 people showed up. That would be unheard of today. If they had to bus in people from the local jails, they would make sure the house was papered. But they had 8,000 fans because they didn't really promote hockey. They didn't reach out to the community. And as a result, they struggled at the box office, although not as much as Kansas City did, which only lasted 2 years in that city and then moved to Colorado and then moved again to New Jersey and became the Devils. So, and of course, when you played and won 8 games, that's not going to encourage people to buy tickets either. So that's really the big difference. Whereas the Kraken owners, they poured more than $2 billion into the franchise, between more than $1 billion to renovate the arena, $500 million for the expansion fee. Then you got to set up a minor league franchise. And it's a lot more expensive starting a hockey team than it is starting, say, a basketball team. All that equipment, and you got to have a lot of extra players and so on and so forth. So that was a difference also. The Kraken have done it right in every way except for being expansion teams on the ice.
You know something? We talked about the original Capitals and the original Islanders, which in their own way were catastrophes. But there's a catastrophe taking place now regarding the NHL and a particular team. And we really have to talk about that. And that is the catastrophic Toronto Maple Leafs. I have renamed the hour or the minutes that we talk about this team. Used to be my favorite team of all time when I was a kid. Yes. And now the Leafs catastrophically might miss the playoffs.
Oh man.
Might miss the playoffs. And Marner came to visit, right?
Yes, he did
And
last night.
And the Leafs were such great hosts.
Elena was there. Elena was at the game.
Yes.
Now, come on, Elena. Let's not. This is not something to fool around. There's no time for comedy. What do the Leafs have to do to avoid this catastrophe?
Well, for starters, putting Stollarts in net. He was just coming back from injury and had been out for a while. He looked really shaky last night, which isn't really surprising. I mean, he played a few games with the Marlies to ramp back up, and then they threw him in as the starter against Vegas. He let in a few soft goals, but the bigger issue was still the defense in front of him. The defense has really been bad. Riley's out of position night after night, and nothing seems to change. Tanev is still out with injury, so the blue line is thin. I mean, early in the season, injuries really hurt this team. Then they fired Mark Savard, and honestly, things actually looked better for a bit. The power play stabilized, the structure looked cleaner, but now it feels like they've completely slipped again. The power play is brutal right now. It's not working, the player usage doesn't make any sense. They keep putting Max Domi in key spots, and the energy isn't there. I mean, overall, the decisions, especially on special teams, feel off. I don't know if the message is getting through anymore. Maybe Berube's system isn't clicking with this group right now. What do you think, Glenn?
I got to see a Maple Leafs game at Scotiabank Arena against, admittedly, one of the elite teams in the league, the Carolina Hurricanes. And I'm not exaggerating. Carolina must have had 5 breakaways. I turned to the person I was sitting with and say, does Toronto play defense optional? Because I'm like, if they don't outscore you, you're not going to win. And it's not on the goalies. I mean, you talk about Lowe and Bellamy, or the Toronto goalies, to borrow a Tommy McVie line, Now I know how Custer felt. I mean, they they're just under siege. And I'm not just saying the defense core, the forwards don't back check either. If the shots, the number of shots, the quality of shots, I don't know. And I feel bad for the Chief too, but maybe when you're a hard nosed coach like Berube, maybe that message wears off over a while. And I think, not to filibuster, but I think there's a bit of a parallel with the Rangers, which is Toronto and New York both had very good teams that thought they were going to get over the hump. They barely didn't get over the hump. And it's like it killed their spirit. And now, you got these two proud original six franchises who are just pretty much hopeless.
Yeah, but there's a difference. And the big difference is the Rangers are dead, okay? The Leafs are still in the fray. They're right there. So my question, and I have to get this from T-Bag about the goalies, they got to pick a goalie who's going to be their goalie, whether it's this guy or that guy, or Wall or this. And also, Elena, you can't escape this. You're the GM, you're the boss of the team. What do you do now to make sure that they get in?
Proper defense, honestly. That's the biggest issue. They need at least two defensemen. Riley isn't as quick anymore, and you can see it. There are just too many mistakes, and that puts everyone else in trouble.
If you're telling me that they need a defenseman, then they got to talk to Chris Drury, because he's dismantling the team. He's not going to give you Gavrikov because they just got him, and he's good. And you really don't want. I wouldn't say Fox. Adam Fox won in Norris, but he's getting injured all the time. So you got to go a little bit down. But the Rangers might want to unload Schneider, the young guy who's been a disaster. He's supposed to get better this year. So that's something you can have. I'm telling you, you should tell your guys there to talk to Drury and get Schneider. We want to get him the hell out of New York.
I was really hoping the Leafs would land Rasmus Anderson from Calgary, but of course Vegas got him. There were multiple teams in on him, Boston, Toronto, and a few others. And Vegas ended up winning, of course. He's a legit defenseman, and honestly, he's exactly the type of player the Leafs needed.
Are the fans worried, or what are the fans thinking?
I think there's a small percentage of fans who are still delusional and believe it's our year, but the majority have given up. You can feel it. People are saying that's it. I can't even watch this anymore. The disappointment is obvious. A lot of boos at the arena, people leaving early, even from the lower ball. The score was that bad. I mean, I stayed, but honestly, you could feel the energy drain. The players didn't look encouraged either. They looked frustrated, upset.
Well, there was one game, I guess last week, the Leafs were actually winning late in the game. They had a 1-goal lead. And for some reason, Berube puts Morgan Riley on the ice to protect the 1-goal lead. And he is the worst defensive defenseman they have. From the center line in, he's great. From the center line back, he's terrible. He doesn't know how to play defense. So that is on the coaching there. And they ended up losing that game in overtime. So, I think something's got to change there in the coaching ranks, because obviously the message isn't getting through. And
Jerry,
who's the assistant coach? Who could? Let's say they dump Berube. Who are they going to bring in? Who's on staff that they can bring in?
They brought in the Marlies coach, Steve Sullivan, I think.
Jerry, 1967 doesn't roll off the tongue like 1940. But I wonder what fan base is going to start singing 1967.
Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt. And it's been a long drought, even longer than my Canucks.
What about the Canucks? What's happening there?
Yeah, they're just a total mess. I think Adam Foote is in over his head, and whatever system he's trying to implement there doesn't suit the Canucks talent pool. I mean, they're they're two ends pulling against the middle, and their defense can't seem to get the puck to the offense, and the offense doesn't seem to want to help out the defense. So it's not working. Adam Foote is totally the wrong guy, and they've got to they've got to do something, because it's a nightmare. They look terrible out there. And Elias Pettersson for $11.6 million, he's not doing anything. I watched the highlight package last night, 15 minutes of Canuck highlights, and he didn't appear once. So we're not getting our money's worth, and I don't know the solution to that problem, but because he's got like 6 more years to go. So I don't know if anybody wants to take him off our hands.
You're making an analogy with the Rangers. There's somebody up at the top who blew it, and the guy up at the top was Jimmy Rutherford. He was supposed to be the guy who knew what the hell was going on. So where do they bring in a guy like Adam Foote? I mean, that's like the Rangers bringing in this guy who won Stanley Cups so many years ago. It doesn't even matter. But he missed the cup, missed the playoffs in 3 straight years, and you bring this guy in and you give him more money than any other coach. That's a definition of insanity. And it looks like that Jimmy Rutherford is the vice president of insanity there.
No, Adam Foote was
finally a hockey job I'd be qualified for.
Adam Foote was an assistant coach with the Canucks for the last few years, and it is very difficult to go from being an assistant coach to a head coach of the same team, because the assistant coaches are allowed to be buddy-buddy with the players, and the head coach, you have to have that 6 degrees of separation, and so they don't see him as an authority figure. They see him as a buddy-buddy, and so it's not working, and it won't work. So I don't know why they keep hanging on to him, because do him a favor, because this is wrecking his reputation, and so do him a favor and cut him loose.
Well, let me ask you this: do they fill the rink every game?
Yeah, I'm not sure if they sell out, but they, it's close. If they don't, it's they're not. They're not suffering for fans.
Well, what about the writers or the electronic people? Are they ripping the team as they should?
Not really. There's a couple of the independent guys who rip them pretty good, but the guys the Province, the Sun, the Sportsnet, those guys, they're not. They're kind of nibbling at the edges a little bit. So yeah.
Well, I'll tell you why the electronic people aren't. Because Ray Ferraro, who's their color analyst on their games, who is a highly respected, very good at what he does, is married to one of the assistant general managers, Tammy Granado. So if he doesn't want the locks changed on the front door, he better, modulate what he says during the broadcast.
You better toe the line, yeah. Yeah, that's that I would call a conflict of interest.
They should tank. That's the strategy.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to say before we run out of time here, Mike Marson. I was a big Mike Marson fan the first year because I thought it was so cool that there was a black guy in the NHL, because he was the only one. And I just thought, even at my age then, I was probably 10, 11, 12 years old. I thought, what courage that would take, because I knew of racism. I'd seen it, growing up, and so I thought, I only got to see him play on TV, I think once or twice, and I just thought he was a really good player, but just the courage that it took to take the path that he took. Like, did you ever get to speak to him personally?
I did speak to him, years and years and years later. Marson faced disgusting racism, and when the Capitals would go on the road to the team hotel, there were hotels where the management said, "We're not gonna let Marson have a room." And Marson, who to your point was immensely talented, but the Capitals would have to threaten to call the NHL and say, if you don't let Marson stay here, none of us are staying here, and we're going to call the league, and nobody's going to stay here. Death threats would get called into the arena. But on the ice, the problem was, here was this kid, teenager, but he's probably one of the 2 or 3 best players on the team. So he's getting thrown out against Yvonne Cornwallis and, all of the big bad Bruins. And we're, now, even if you have the Bedards or the Schaefers for the Islanders, they get a little sheltered as teenagers. They're given a little care. They're not thrown out against the other team's first lines. And Marson was as a teenager, so he never was able to exercise his potential, on top of the fact that, he would come back off a road trip and somebody would slash the tires of his car. So it was an impossible situation, and I admire him for persevering as much as he did. Stan, he was like the Larry Doby of the NHL. Everybody remembers Jackie Robinson. Very few people remember Larry Doby for the Cleveland Indians, the second black baseball player. So it was a reflection of the 70s, and the Capitals, probably either on and off the ice, didn't give them the protection he deserved. But you're right, Jerry. Coming out of juniors, he was a tremendous talent, and if he was on a halfway decent team, and if he had been given more protection, we might have been, a lot more people might have known about Mike Marson.
Well, I'll tell you something. I had a friend who was very big on the inside of the NHL. His name was Munson Campbell, one of the greatest guys I've ever met. And Munson was very close to the Detroit family, the Norris family, particularly Bruce. And when the Oakland team was falling all apart, and the league had to take the team over for a brief time, Munson was running the team. And Munson told me that Washington's got this kid. He's fantastic. He said, "Who?" His name is Mike Marson. You're gonna really hear a lot about him. And they're very lucky, because this guy has got all kinds of talent. So naturally, I would focus on Mike. And like you said, that it was a very, very, very unfortunate. But this was the beginning of the pioneering, and it's disgusting what some of these guys had to go through. I don't want to go into other stories, but Mike did as much as he could under the circumstances, and it took a lot of guts to do that.
For sure. Hey, before we conclude, I do want to tell you the best Todd Bidner story.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Is that okay if I share that?
Because you're telling 2 of them, I'm going to tell 2 jokes tonight.
Wow. I'll skip the Todd Bidner story. I'd rather hear your jokes.
No, you don't want to really hear these.
Okay. All right. So Todd Bidner's playing for minor league Hershey in the AHL on a Friday night against Rochester, and he gets a call. The Capitals have a home game, an afternoon game. This was on a Friday night. He plays against Rochester. He's got to go down to DC because the Capitals have a matinee against the Hartford Whalers. So he goes down there. He plays the next afternoon against the Hartford Whalers. the acting GM at the time, Roger Crozier, the old Sabres and Wings goalie, says to Bidner, they need you back in Hershey tonight. Hershey has a game Saturday night. They need you to play in it. So he drives the 3 hours between DC and Hershey, Pennsylvania, and he plays Saturday night for the Bears. So he's played 2 games in 2 leagues in 2 cities in the same day. And then the Hershey folks come to see him afterward and say, they need you back in DC. The Caps have an afternoon game Sunday afternoon against Edmonton. So he he drives back south. He plays Sunday afternoon against Edmonton. So what he didn't know then is, why was he called up for these 2 Capitals games? Because the Caps were showcasing him, because after the game, they trade him to the Oilers.
Oh my God.
So he played 4 games in less than 3 days, and 2 in the same day. And then the kicker is, they hand him a plane ticket, and he thinks he's going to Edmonton. The plane lands in Wichita, Kansas. He's been assigned to the Oilers minor league team in Wichita, Kansas. And Bidner says, I didn't even know there was a Wichita, Kansas.
That's a very good one.
Yeah. Before we go too, I just want to thank Glenn for having me on his podcast, the Hockey Time Machine, and that was probably in the top 2 interviews that I've done. So it's just it was a great time, and I encourage everybody to go watch the Hockey Time Machine. It's a great thing, and I just was honored to be on it. So thank you for that, Glenn.
Well, your book, right back at you, Jerry. Your book, Hockey Nobody, everybody needs to get that too, because some of the most hilarious hockey stories I've ever read. Jerry, as Johnny Cash said, he's been everywhere, man. He's been everywhere.
Maeve, you want to tell us the jokes?
Okay, well, it's a doctor joke, and person goes to the doctor, says, doctor, I think I swallowed a pillow. The doctor says, well, how do you feel? He says, a little down in the mouth. So the doctor says to the nurse, how's that little boy doing, the one who swallowed 10 quarters? And the nurse says, no change yet.
Oh my God. Glenn, this was amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. Big thanks as always to Stan and Jerry, and thank you to everyone listening and watching. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to Bottle Rocket, follow us on socials, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye.